Well, it's great to catch up with a man who represented Australia in three Olympic Games in diving: 1976, 1980, the controversial Olympic Games in Moscow. He's got a couple of great stories to tell about that as well. And 1984, where he became the first diver to make the final in both the springboard and the platform events. He's gone on to have a very successful career as diving coach and a high performance manager with the Australian team now. So he's part of the team that is getting ready for the Olympic Games in Paris in the next week. He's in London with the team at the moment at a training camp. He was also part of Team Great Britain as their high performance manager, where they broke a 44-year drought in regard to winning Olympic medals. And they, of course, went on to win a gold medal after that with Tom Daley. And then he spent some time with the American team as well and had success there too. And as I say, now back with the Australian team. Also a very successful commentator with a great mate of mine at Channel 7. They had a lot of fun together. How could you not have fun with the late, great Drew Morphett? And, of course, my guest today on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. Is the great DSteve Foley. Steve, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan.
It's a great pleasure to have you, Steve. Can I start with this current team? How confident are you that this team can perform well? It looks like it's a pretty good team with a wonderful pedigree, some world champions in there, and, of course, some very experienced Olympians, Annabelle Smith and Melissa Wu, who's just been part of our program.
Yeah, as you say, it's a good mixture, isn't it, of youth and experience. So I'm really excited. And I think one of the great things is they're all getting on well as a team. You know, it's not always you put 9, 10 people together and they all gel, but this is a pretty unique group that we're with. And the new Olympians are just super excited to be in the same area as Annabelle Smith and Melissa Wu. So they're rubbing shoulders with the elite, and that itself is a great learning experience for them.
Why do you think they're gelling so well?
Look, we've done a lot of camps and preparation and been to world champs together, the majority. But, you know, we had just a 2-3 day camp in Sydney before we even left the country, so that we were a team before we left the country. We didn't want to we'll all meet in England and become a team. So, you know, we did little bonding things in Sydney, and we went to a French restaurant for dinner. And would you believe it? Of all things, they served kangaroo steak, so that backfired, didn't it?
They didn't serve escargot, Steve.
They did do that, thank goodness. And I want you to know I did try it, Dano. So it was all good stuff. But yeah, kangaroo steak at a French restaurant. There you go. That's a new one.
Was the escargot nice, Steve? Was it nice or not really?
I enjoyed it. Yes, a little bit of garlic butter washed down with a nice bottle of Shiraz. It was perfect.
Well, you could do that. The divers probably couldn't. Tell me about the world champs, Cassel Rousseau and Dominic Bedgood. Are they a chance of winning a medal?
Yeah, I think they're what you call they're on the peripheral, right? Yeah. So they'd need to have the meat of their life, dive really well, but that's what the Olympics is all about, trying to perform when it matters most. And maybe need a little bit of help from some of the other favourites, like obviously China, a favourite, the great Tom Daley in Great Britain. You know, they won the gold in Tokyo, beat China in the men's 10-metre synchro. So Tom Daley's got a new partner this time. So yeah, it'll be a challenge, but they're more than capable. But I think it's probably need a little bit of stuff to go your way.
Well, that's often the case, isn't it? But they're world champions, so they'd have a lot of self-belief, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's right. They're not lacking confidence, that's for sure.
Steve Foley is my guest, champion Australian diver and high performance manager of this Australian team. He was Team Great Britain and Team USA as well. And he's been involved in the sport for a long time. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans. We've got over 25 lenders on our panel for Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures. Overall, Steve, this is your 12th Olympic Games. It's been a great journey for you, hasn't it, as both a diver and a coach? And a commentator.
Thank you, yeah. Well, who would have thought that a little boy from Baldwin in the suburbs of Melbourne would go on and have a great career? So it's been pretty exciting, a few ups and downs, of course, like everything. But, you know, I had asthma chronically as a kid growing up in Melbourne. And there weren't any of those wonderful Ventolin puffers back in those days. So the doctor said, hey, go and do some swimming. It'd be good for your lungs. And it'll help you breathe better. So I did that, and no offense to the swimmers because you're awesome. I thought it was boring, so I decided I'd try my hand at the platform at the other end of the pool. Um, that's sort of how I got into diving, really, from having asthma as a child.
And you're an 18-year-old and you went to the Olympic Games in Montreal, which weren't a great Olympic Games performance-wise for Australia, but a wide-eyed boy from the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, blonde, I remember too, Steve. What was that experience like as a teenager?
It's sort of sandy now, not quite blonde, unfortunately.
I don't have any, so you're going better than I am, Steve.
Well, there you go. But yeah, you know what, Dan? I mean, it's a funny one. I keep telling everyone that I was part of that successful failure of the Montreal Olympic team because out of that, the AIS was born.
Correct.
Yes. So, in that sense, I'm part of that great story, if you like. But it was a funny one too because it was directly after Munich with the terrorist attack in Munich. So I think it was the first time security was absolutely beefed up, and it was sort of the beginning of what we now know as normal security, isn't it? But
Yeah.
and I should point out, a lot of people laugh at this, but back in 1976, there were two buildings, one for female, one for male.
Really?
So it was all segregated, and the girls were allowed to come to the boys' room if they so chose, but the guys were not allowed anywhere near the women's quarters. So how things have changed.
What was the experience like being part of that team, even though you didn't have a lot of success? I mean, just being in Olympic Games, what did that mean to a teenager from
Yeah,
Melbourne?
look, like everyone, you have dreams, don't you, before you go? And there weren't many what you call international competitions. So really, that was my first major competition at the senior level. So when you walk into something like an Olympic Games, it can be intimidating, and it's also a little bit overawing because suddenly you're on the diving board with these people you've read about or watched on the old Super 8 films, So
Yes.
it was highs and lows, you might say, because I'll never forget the diving used to follow the swimming events. So the swimming finals might finish at 9 o'clock at night, and then about 9:30, 10 o'clock, the diving would start. And I remember doing my last dive at like 2:15 in the morning, so well past an 18-year-old's bedtime. So it's amazing even how the Olympic scheduling and programs have improved and changed, and it really is just it's a real sporting event now. Whereas I think back then, there wasn't a lot of TV coverage either. I remember I think ABC at the time showed some highlights, but of all things, it became the Moscow Olympics where media became really big.
I remember Peter Longman, a former boss of mine at the ABC. He was big on diving in Brisbane because obviously that's where it was centralised. I'll get to that soon. I've spoken to Melissa about the program being centralised for a while, but he used to do either a highlights program or even a show on diving, whether it might be the National Diving Championships. And that was my first memory of diving, probably in the late 70s in between those two Olympics, Steve.
Right. Yeah, no, it was. And I remember thinking I was probably lucky in my career because there was actually some TV, and they had our national championships on TV, and obviously I was winning at the time, so you get a little bit of publicity. But of course, one of the big things, and I'm not digressing too much, but we had a superstar in the world of diving by the name of Greg Louganis, who just about everyone's heard, and I think once you have a superstar that attracts people that they didn't care about diving, they wanted to watch the absolute best. Diving, to me, he became the impetus of why diving got a lot of international world coverage. And it really, Greg Louganis, I think, changed the TV audience of diving.
Former champion Australian diver who was the first diver to make a final in both the springboard and the platform at his third Olympic Games in 1984. And now he's a high performance manager of the Australian team, getting ready for Paris in a week or so's time. DSteve Foley's my guest on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. Why was Greg Louganis so good, Steve? I mean, he won, of course, both, didn't he, in 1980 and 1984. And in 1984, or was it 1988? I think it was 1988. He
Yeah.
hit his head, didn't he? 88, 92, sorry. 88, he hit his head.
No, you're right.
That was
84,
amazing.
88. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
You know what? Look, in '84, I think we saw Greg Louganis at his what I call his physical prowess. He was powerful on the springboard. He was athletic on the platform, and he was also doing what was at the time the hardest dives known. And he could do them at that time for eights, whereas other people were trying them and just happy if they landed on their head and not their back. You know, he was just setting the bar that now the world have followed and caught up with. But in '88, though, when he hit his head on the board, as you said, Dan, we saw Greg Louganis at his mental prowess, toughest. You know, he still had two dives to go in the preliminary, and they both sort of reverse direction spinning dives, which is what he just hit his head on. And I remember I was sort of commentating. I said, well, expect this to be down the swimming pool end. It won't be anywhere near the board. But oh, no, not Greg. He stood it right up over the board and gave everyone a scare again. But I think he managed to qualify in fifth with virtually a failed dive, which is incredible. And then the next day he came back with a few stitches and won the gold. So, um, that was the mental toughness side of it, because some people wouldn't even get back on the board and call it a day, but not Greg. So, there's no doubt, like all great athletes, that inner will is incredible.
I mean, he would be one of the greatest we've seen, but the Chinese have sort of dominated since then. I mean, they've just taken the sport to another level almost, haven't they, without taking anything away from Greek, Steve?
No, correct. And I remember back in when I was obviously coaching, and we took a team to China. On the wall of their national centre was pictures of Greg Louganis doing his hurdle, and it had Chinese writing underneath. And I asked, what did it say? And it said, "This is the perfect hurdle," and that's really the jump you do before you land on the springboard. So they weren't silly. They were studying the world's best and what you had to do, and as you say, they've then taken it to another level, and they're quite incredible what they're doing now. And uh, I think you've got to give them a lot of credit too, because they have absolutely raised the world standard. Back in my era, you had the US and someone was quite good from Italy, or someone was okay from Mexico. But now the world, like Malaysia, can win Olympic medals. It's phenomenal what China have done for the sport.
Sort of put it on the map in a lot of ways, even more than it was. I mean, it was just dominated by a few countries, but as soon as China came along, other countries have got interested in Australia, become better, and even a country that you're heavily involved in, Stephen, you've got to get a lot of credit for this. You went over as the high performance manager. Was that even more of a highlight than diving itself by breaking the 44-year drought in ensuring that Great Britain won a medal under your tutelage?
Look, it was certainly a highlight, and it doesn't matter what country you're in, and even though you're an Aussie, you commit to the job in the country and you give it your best. And I think, if nothing else, it was just to try and point them on their way and give them that belief, because, as you say, they hadn't had a medal for 44 years. And if you go back to Sydney Olympics for Australia, we hadn't won a medal for 76 years. Dick Eve was the only gold medalist ever back in 1924. And everyone kept saying, well, when's diving going to break the 76-year barrier? And they did in Sydney when they got 2 bronze medals in the synchro events. And then since then, Australia has won a diving medal at every Olympic Games. That's pretty amazing when you look at that. So, look, it was just nice to be involved with Britain and turn it from a bit like the old days when I dived. It was fun. You had a job. You had to go to uni or whatever. Your coach was a part-timer. He had a job, into a professional sporting body, if you like. And now, as you say, it's world class. And I think they're ranked second in the world behind China at the moment, Great Britain. So it was just exciting to, if you like, try and launch it in the right direction. So I enjoyed the challenge. That's probably the best thing.
Was that more of a challenge, or taking on Team USA more of a challenge?
I think Team USA, because with Britain, I felt like I was starting from scratch, if you like, and you can only go one way in theory. Now, US hadn't won a Olympic diving medal for 2 Olympics, Athens and Beijing. They come away empty-handed. And so suddenly they've said, look, what are we going to do? Because they don't like really getting foreigners, but they reached out and said, look, we've seen what you've done with Britain. Can you come and give us a hand? So that was a real challenge because it's a very different sporting system with the colleges. And, the colleges employ 90% of the diving coaches, not the national body. So therefore, you don't have, if you like, a little bit of ownership or control of the coaches. The colleges do all that. So it was, I had to think out of the box a little bit and work on how I could make it work. But, you got to love we often think they're a bit cocky and all that, but their self-belief that, come on, we're the best, we can do this. It can be quite infectious, though, but you have to get it in the right context. And I said to them, well, they were telling me when I arrived, we've got to beat the Chinese. And I said, well, before you do that, you need to beat your bloody neighbours, Mexico and Canada, because they're winning Olympic medals and you're not. And you haven't paid attention to Australia or Britain or Germany and all these other countries that get government funding now. So it wasn't that they weren't any good, but other countries got way better and they weren't paying attention, and they're so focused on, we've got to beat China, they couldn't beat, 7 of the other countries involved at the top level. So it was more a case of, I like to think, just a bit of education and took a little bit of pressure off them on this expectation, because they're very outcome focused. We are the best, we're going to win, which is good, but also a deadly trap, because, you're better off thinking of the process rather than the outcome.
Good point you bring up, Steve. I just don't think it's in sport, but I mean, I've got a lot of relatives in America and I love the country itself. I'm a bit concerned
Yep.
about which direction it may go, but we're not here to talk politics on Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures for Aussie Home Loans. I think you know where I'm going with that. But it's all about America, isn't it, for a lot of Americans? They don't think outside the square much, do they?
No, and I think that's probably where I had a victory, really. It just made them look at a bigger picture, if you like, rather than just themselves. And it was funny. I remember, and that's one of the great things about the US. Just before London Olympics, I took them to the Walter Reed Memorial Hospital, and it's for the wounded soldiers. And so, here's someone the same age as 22-year-old, 23-year-olds who've stepped on a landmine and lost their legs, and they're learning how to walk again with these titanium legs. And it was fascinating, and it was all aimed to show them that is real life. What you were doing at the Olympics is fun. What are you complaining about? So it changed their focus, and I'd like to think it worked because they went on and got 4 medals. So, but things like that, the wounded, so impactful. We had coaches in tears, and I was all choked up because, you're just seeing these young men that they're still so passionate about their country, and they're learning to walk and titanium. It was really fascinating, and I think it was powerful that it just put the Olympics in perspective.
What makes a good coach and a good high performance manager, Steve? You obviously got to be a good people person, which you are. That helps, doesn't it?
Look, I think so. I agree with that. Although a lot of people won't always say I'm a good bloke, but we don't care what they say.
I think you're a good bloke.
Look, it's helped that I know the sport. I believe that really does help. So if I do have something to say, people can't sort of say, "Oh, he's never done it. What would he know?" So I think that just gives anything I may want to say that little bit of credibility. But it doesn't matter. You're right. A good people, a leader. I think you have to be a leader, and I often think a really good leader is someone who listens. Because my job was to listen to the athletes from US or England about what's missing or what's happening and why and then the coaches, what they're feeling and everything. So rather than me just come in and say, right, this is how we're going to do it now and become a dictator, that doesn't work anymore. So I like to think I listened well, and then I could then lead the team because I did listen to what they had to say.
Olympic
And we're
legend.
actually seeing a lot of that in AFL, aren't we now? The player's voice and things. It's a very important, powerful tool.
Certainly is. It's called empowerment. I think David Parkin was one that helped
Yeah.
win a premiership by
Yep.
empowering his team, a very experienced team back in 1995. And I think a lot of the other coaches have started doing that, not just in AFL, but as you say, Steve, in a number of other sports. Steve Foley is my guest. He's a legend when it comes to diving. He's going to his 12th Olympic Games as either a diver. He went to 3 as a diver, and he's 9th as either a high performance manager, a commentator, or a coach, whether it be Team Great Britain, USA, or Australia. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Can I go back to your diving days? You went to your first games at the age of 18. I've been reading up a little bit about the 1980 experience. Now, Malcolm Fraser didn't want Australia to go. I think that it would be fair to say, and having read a great book by Lisa Forrest called The Boycott, and I think one Steve Foley might have appeared in that a couple of times, telling a couple of his great stories, which I hope he'll tell again in just a minute for our audience on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures. And Malcolm Fraser didn't want Australia to go because America had pulled out of Russia, because Russia had invaded Afghanistan. But a lot of the athletes wanted to go. It was a messy situation, Steve, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, very true, Dan. And, I would have been 22, and I was working in a bank to help pay my way. I'd like to say it was Aussie Home Loans, but it was the national bank at the time.
Right.
But there were few things, and I don't want to take too long. But
No.
the first one was I got a phone call from the sports minister, with Malcolm Fraser's government. And he said, Steve, you're the sort of captain of the dive team. Well, it sounds good, but there's only 3 of us going, 2 girls and myself. But it was nice to be called captain. And this will be your second Olympics, and we really don't want you to go. It's terrible Russia are doing, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll tell you what, though, we're prepared to give you $5,000 not to go. So you got to understand, in 1980, a 22-year-old, $5,000, I could see myself driving a convertible MG down the streets with the blonde locks flowing, and God, I was having a ball.
You'd be on fire. Yeah.
That's right. And then he made a comment to me that just made it so simple. And he said, but Steve, if you go, you'll get no government support in the future. And I said, oh, who cares? I haven't had any in the past. Hung up the phone.
Fair enough.
But that was the fact too. I hadn't, and that's why I was working in the bank to pay my way. So
did you feel good about that, Steve, in hanging up the phone?
I did, actually. Good. Yeah, I did. Yeah, because to me, it's I get the politics. No one's going to Russia or Moscow to. If I thought, and I think a lot of the athletes would have done that, if by not going it would have made a difference to the people in Afghanistan, and it really would have withdrawn Russian troops, I think a lot of us would have said, you're right, we're not going. But what people forget is that Russia stayed in Afghanistan for another 10 years after the Moscow Olympics. So, and no one really cared in 81, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So, and the other thing that happened, as I said, working in the bank, there was a millionaire customer. And the year before Moscow, he'd brought me around and said, Steve, come and have a barbecue, game of tennis. And I thought it was pretty good, And he gave me $1,000 because he heard I was going to Europe. He said, look, I want to help you. Here's $1,000. And I thought, that's very kind of you. I hope the tax man's not listening. It was a long time ago. Anyway, then in 1980, he invited me over again for a game of tennis and a barbecue. I thought, oh, God, it might give me another $1,000. This is great. And he said, Stephen, as you know, I was born in Poland, and Russia invaded Poland. You must not go to these Olympic Games. You must go to the press. You must do a big speech. And if you do, I will pay for every diving trip in the future. But if you don't, I will close my account. And I'm like, oh, my God. But, this was this 22-year-old, like, all I want to do is dive. I really thought he was going to close his account. But I said to him, I appreciate it. I don't condone what's going on. But no, I'm not prepared to become a spokesperson for Poland. And anyway, the good thing was he didn't shut his account, thank goodness. But, the pressure we were under to not go from just people in the street, a customer at the bank, the government, it was an ugly time, and we had to sneak out. There was no fanfare. You weren't allowed to wear a uniform. You had to look like Joe Blow getting on a plane. So it was when you look back, it was a kind of a sad, horrible Olympics that way. But it's still a great experience, and yeah, it's things have changed a little, but yeah, it was sad. And look, some people took the money, and good on them, but I understand that. And some of the bigger sports couldn't go because they relied on government funding. Yeah, I think like equestrian and sailing and things like that never went.
Hockey was another one. I mean, they thought they
Yeah,
could.
you're right. That's
They
right.
were red hot. That team.
Yeah,
You ask Rick Charlesworth. I tell the story a
that's
lot.
right.
They were red hot. They just missed out in '76. They won a silver. That
Correct.
team had developed for 4 years, hadn't lost a game, apparently, the men's team. The women's team was pretty strong. First ever Olympic Games for women's hockey. And I think that the chief of staff might have been the vice president of Hockey Australia, and Malcolm Fraser
Right.
got to him, and he got to the other
Yep.
hockey officials, and they didn't go. And I don't think Rick and a few of the other players have ever forgiven some people for that.
No, and look, I've got a lot of friends in America, and obviously when I went over to America and caught up with a lot of them when I was working there, there's a lot of the coaches that they're now coaches, but their one and only Olympics was Moscow,
Really?
and they never got to go. So, and there may be some Canadians as well because they didn't go. So, yeah, it was just. I think at the end of the day, it was just sad because politics was trying to rule the world of sport, um, and in actual fact, by us going. And I always think of the Mean Machine because that was the birth of them in 1980,
Yeah.
and winning that gold. In my own way, I think that was more of a stick it up, you guys, rather than us not going. To beat them in their own backyard was one of the great things that you could do. A bit like good old Jesse Owens way back in Berlin in '36. So I think in actual fact you can make more of a statement by going and performing and maybe beating them than not going.
Were you happy with your performance in 1980? I know Valerie McFarlane, who became Valerie
Yep,
Beto, or Valerie Beto, Valerie McFarlane, of course. She did really well in her two events. She made the final, so she was
that's
magnificent.
right. Yeah, well, she was the first Aussie diver to make the finals, and I was the first male diver to make both the springboard and platform. So we had a great career together, and but she was terrific in Moscow, and they changed a few rules because of the boycott, and instead of a top 12 final, it became a top 8, and you're allowed 3 per country instead of 2 per country. Although I think it had been 3 in Montreal, so. And I found myself in 11th place just outside the finals. But ahead of me were 3 East Germans. And it was, put it this way, and you never want to criticise judging because at the end of the day, you've got to dive good enough they can't hurt you. But there's no doubt that Russia and East Germany were well rewarded from the judges.
Really?
So I actually thought I should have made the finals, and a few other people thought I did on my performance. But at the end of the day, I think the main thing is, and I always say that to my athletes, I left that pool knowing I'd give it my all, and I was really happy with my performance. And the judges determined where your placing is in the end. But the main thing was, and it was very close. There was only a smattering of points between myself down to about 7th or 8th, I think. So it was all good though. Good experience from that point of view, and it probably made me more determined to set it right for LA.
I believe that you got out pretty quickly. I mean, there wasn't much hanging around or much partying, was there? It wasn't that sort of atmosphere, was it?
But no, very true. I was actually in the food hall having lunch with John Semegi, who was a rower that, a rower or kayaker for no,
Kayaker, I
rower.
think. Kayaker,
Yeah,
yeah.
kayaker, sorry, yes. And he got the silver medal.
Mm.
And he got to carry the flag for the closing ceremony. Well, actually, the Olympic flag, because you couldn't carry the part of the boycott thing. You couldn't have Australia's flag. So one day I'm having lunch with him, and the next day I get on a plane to go home. And I get home and I turn the TV on to watch the closing, and there's the Maggie. It was kind of surreal. But you're quite right. We had to go home virtually the next day. You finish competing as part of the. I think they were the little agreements the AOC did with the government that we have an Olympic flag, not play any Australian national anthem. We had the Olympic anthem, which was a bit sad for the teams that won. And you had to come home pretty much when your event finished. So there was still a few, if you like, I think concessions that had to be done for us to go. But full credit to the AOC, because I dare say that was a tough time for them, because they would have been really under the pump from the government not to go.
Now, Steve, obviously 1984, you felt there was unfinished business after 1980, and you performed brilliantly. Did you know that was likely, even though you were still in your mid-20s, going to be your last Olympics?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I wasn't positive, but you got to remember back then, even though the AIS had started, diving was not in the AIS in '84. So we were still. What I did is I decided I'd work two jobs. So I still worked in the bank, and then, believe it or not, a doorman at a nightclub in King Street. So Grain Store Tavern. I put a
Oh,
plug in
yes,
there. It's only
it's
40
not
years
around
ago.
anymore. Yeah, it was
It's
that.
not okay.
Yeah, the York Butter Factory and the Underground were right next door to each other at the bottom end of King Street. Remember them well.
That's right. And inflation, and it was all happening,
Correct.
So a great place for an athlete to hang out in, I might add.
Of course, Steve, yes.
Yeah, so they were terrific, They just helped me, and but there was there was a band there that used to come and play Thursdays and Saturdays. And Thursday night they had a brass section to go with their music, and they said, "Poles, we hear you're going to the Olympics and you're going to train in America and really prepare, and we'd like to help you because it's all self-funded back then." And they said, "We'll advertise it, and some people will come and you can take the $5 per head off the door." I said, "Oh, that's great, So normally they have about, I don't know, 120 people on a Thursday night, and everything. Bugging me dead, 550 turned up, and
Really?
everyone was squished in. Yeah, I didn't know I had so many friends, but so
Wow.
it was amazing. Yeah, so and they honoured their agreement. Here's a bit of money, and yeah, it really helped me. So I went and trained in Miami, actually, because LA was going to be outdoors, so it's important I trained outdoors. And I just, my coach was fantastic, but he still had a 9 to 5 job himself. So I just needed to dive a bit more in a full-time program, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, as you say, I was really determined that, okay, I'm going out on a high if this is to be it. You're never really sure when it's it. But after LA, it got to the point that I suppose you could say, what do I do with my life? Am I going to stay in the bank, or do I want to go back to university, or what are you going to do? So, I was probably, like all athletes, question time. What's your next step in the journey?
And for a little while, it was commentating with the great Drew Morphett. What was that like?
Oh, mate, he's unbelievable, isn't he? I mean, you know what? He just puts you at ease, doesn't he? He's such a master, absolute master. And I think the biggest thing he taught me was just be yourself, because
Yes.
that's what Drew was. Drew was himself, and boy, does he have some jokes, and he was quick-witted, and look, I got to tell you, Dan, I don't know how, but we just gelled, and it was so much fun, and yeah, we're probably a bit risque here and there, but you get away with it, I guess, in that era. But he was just a master. And he never. I think it was really important that he never thought of himself as a diving expert. So he didn't try to pretend he was, and that's the great thing about Drew. You're the expert, Steve. You bloody talk about that. So he just didn't overstep, if like, his mark. But yeah, he was just so much fun, and we had a ball, and yeah, it was. Yeah, and we were friends ever since, and right up to his death, which was very tragic. But yeah, it just you don't get anyone more professional, but more natural. He was just, he just put you at ease. If you're going to be nervous doing your first TV gig, you have to do it with Drew Morphett, because the nerves went straight away. He just put you at ease.
Were you worried he was going to swear on air, Steve? Because he certainly swore a bit off it.
He did, didn't he? Yeah, he had his hand on the button quite a lot, just in case, I could tell. But yeah, look, I don't know if you remember, but at Sydney, we got asked to do put a diving commentary on the mascots.
Oh,
And
yes. Yes, you
floating off
did.
10 metre, right? But the competition was see who could make the biggest splash. And of course, you've got Millie and Ollie and Sid just floating down and hardly a ripple, And then they had Fatso, the fat ass wombat, for those who can remember. and they put a lead weight in him. When he hit, he just about emptied the pool. And
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I reckon Drew and I, we must have done 10 takes because we were laughing so hard. It was just hilarious. But it was, we just had so much fun at it, and I hope that all the viewers enjoyed it, because I think something we both tried to do was help sell the sport, but sell it to the people that don't know diving. It's got nothing to do with 10,000 people that might know it. It's to do with 10 million who don't, and tried to make it, if you like, entertaining.
When they asked you to commentate, did you say yes straight away? I mean, as you said, it was something you hadn't done before, and the fact you knew the sport obviously helped, didn't it? I mean, was it you didn't hesitate straight away?
No, I didn't. It was funny, really. It was 1994. The world champs were in Rome, and I was there. And Bruce McAvaney and a few were there as well to cover the swimming more than the diving, because we had the great Kieran Perkins at the time dominating the world, etc. Um, Bruce said, "Hey, we're going to put a bit of a voiceover on the diving. Would you come and sit in on it?" And I'd known Macca, just I don't know how, but I had a little bit. And so, yeah, I sat and did a bit with him. And then it was probably after that I got a call from Seven in either late 94 or 95, just saying, we'd like to put you together with Drew at the Atlanta Olympics. So that was sort of the one. And then I did Sydney with Drew. So it'd be fair to say, no, I didn't hesitate, because at the same time, too, I was going in a transition from the national head coach after 11 years to a state institute to help start up that. And then, yeah, it was just, I don't know, a lot of different progressions in my life, but I really enjoyed the commentating for sure.
Steve Foley is my guest, star diver and diving coach and high performance manager. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans for dashing down to Olympic adventures. Their areas of expertise include pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Was it always something you wanted to do, Coach?
Yeah, it was for some reason, Dan. I'm not sure why, but I remember as a kid we had a trampoline in the background, and the neighbours and people wanted to come in and have a bounce and a play, and I found myself teaching them how to do a somersault. So I just sort of had that inkling to go into it. But I think also because I spent a lot of time back and forwards training in America, and I actually trained alongside Leganis for several years as well, and I just felt at that time I learnt so much that it'd be silly not to put something back in. And I was very fortunate that, as you're aware, just after LA Olympics, diving did so well with the team of four, everyone made finals. The AIS put diving into its program, which kicked off January '85. And they asked me to come and help start it with a legendary coach from Western Australia, Bruce Prance. So um, yeah, the sort of thus ended my bank career and my doorman challenge, and ended up becoming a coach. But I just enjoyed it because I really wanted to put back into it.
Are you a fan of, and I've asked Melissa this, centralised programs or decentralised programs? What do you think works better?
Look, it's a tough one. They've both got their pluses. How's that? Um, we had a centralised program in Brisbane, as she probably told you, for a long time there at the AIS. But we're an early specialisation sport, and sometimes we get some 14, 15-year-olds like Charlie Petroff in Victoria, who won the Commonwealth Games with Melissa in Birmingham. Um, you can't just say, right, 15-year-old coming to Brisbane and pack up your whole life, or hope mum will come, or that's where it's really disruptive. Leaving home in a big country like Australia is very challenging if you're under 18, and it can still be challenging after 18. But I actually think the hardest part is, and it's rampant in every sport, just because you put a couple of coaches in power, you don't know that it's going to work for them. Melissa gels with her coach Chava Sobrino in Sydney. It's a bond that you can't duplicate, and I think that's really important. That it's all about, in some ways, the coach and athlete's relationship. Now, when you have a centralised program, you say, right, we're going to put these three coaches in. There's no guarantee that any of those three will even work for the athlete. So therefore, it's a negative move, really.
With the synchronised swimmers, though, it's probably important they're in the same state if they're going to be
Correct.
decentralised. Is that right?
Yeah, no, definitely. We're looking, how do we do that better, leading into certainly LA, but Brisbane 2032. Because it's interesting at the moment, we've got Annabelle Smith in Melbourne and Madison Keeney in Brisbane,
Mm.
um, and then Cassio Russo in Brisbane and Dom Bedgood in Melbourne. And they're our two synchro teams going into Paris.
Right.
Um, so it's a bit unusual, but having said that, we get camps, bring them together, we send down to Melbourne for a week, or you come up to Brisbane for a week. But a lot of it is also the important thing about synchro is, can you match each other's quality of dive? It's no good like, Laganis can do a dive for 10 and I do it for 7s. That's not going to quite match in the synchro,
No.
you know. So it's getting that compatibility, and so it helps to be in the same pool and we bring them together. But if you've got quite often, your best two individual divers will make your best synchro divers anyway, because the quality of dive is very similar. But yeah, you're quite right, Dave. It's in our plan to, where possible, bring them together in the same facility.
Now, I know you weren't part of the Australian team when this happened, but Chantal Newbury was a superstar at the 2004 Games. She won a
Yeah.
bronze medal in the synchro. She won a gold medal in the individual. She started the 2006 Commonwealth Games as well. I spoke to Melissa Wu about that on Dashing Games Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. And then she's had her struggles in her life after that. The Australian Olympic or Australian Athletes Commission, which is part of the Australian Olympic Committee, has come into vogue over the last few years. Do you think we can do a little bit more, maybe to help people like Chantal and other athletes that when their Olympic career is over, be able to transition better into normal life?
Look, I think so, Dan. Yeah, and it's always a tough one, isn't it? There's someone's dream their whole life for 20 years is to get the gold medal, and they get the gold medal, but it sort of ends like that, and it doesn't suddenly mean, right, here's millions of dollars and you're set for life. Um, it'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't work that way. It does in China, but it doesn't here.
No.
But you could, so obviously, not having won an Olympic medal, I can only imagine what it was like for them to be on the highest of highs. But eventually, you do come crashing down because, in simple terms, reality hits, doesn't it? You still got to get a job or get on with life or whatever. But I like to think now sports are trying to keep them involved a bit more in their sport, because you know someone like Chantel, the amazing amount of knowledge she has for diving, and if you listen to a story, and I obviously knew Chantel very well. Man, was she a tough competitor,
Mm.
just, and she was so hungry for it. It was almost like she wasn't going to lose it. She just, everything she did was aimed at that. But it could be a good story to say, you know, don't forget you've got to have a balance in life. And I think that's really important. She really didn't have anything else but diving at the time. That
And
was pretty much her whole life.
she had her
And
two small boys,
and
of
then
course, didn't she? She had her two small boys.
correct with Robert Newbury, that's right. And so, and I think that helped at some point there. But look, yeah, I mean, only she can tell you why she got derailed or it didn't quite happen. But because she did work for Diving Australia for a few years after, as a sort of a development type officer to try and look for talent identification and everything else. But I'm not sure how long she did that. I'm going to say maybe 2-3 years. But um, yeah, look, who knows, right? It could be people you meet. Funny things happen, and you
Correct.
get just go a little direction, and it's offline, and it's a tough one because in her case, you're in a sport with young kids, so um, yeah, it's how do you balance it? That you can't just say, well, see you later, but that's what they did to her, which wasn't good. They should have said, okay, we can't keep employing you like this, but what we want to do is, how can we help you? Can we get you some counselling? Can we get you some help? Can we get and I think there's people, as you say, I wasn't really here in that era, but since Sydney and for a while there, Australia was definitely, and I think a lot of the world, and we've heard stories from Great Britain too, it was all about winning.
Mm.
You've got to win, sort of thing. Now what we're seeing is win well. In other words, if you're going to win, we want you to still be healthy and well, and there's a lot of support systems around athletes and coaches now, which I think is brilliant. And she was just probably unlucky that that hadn't really established itself or set itself up in her era.
Because it was such a special victory, considering she also had children. We certainly wish her all the best. Just on the mental health issues, Steve, I mean, are you able to, with your experience as a high performance manager and a coach, be able to detect when someone isn't quite right mentally, and how do you help them straight away to ensure they're going to be okay down the track?
Yeah, and it's a difficult one now because I think because sport has set up what's called the athlete wellness and education person, AW&E, and each sport has one now, and credit to the AIS and the government for funding those positions. So what we are seeing is if it's a good relationship, they're pretty quick now to call up those people. So they almost bypass the coach or even myself from that point of view. They go straight to, this lady's here to help us, and then she's got the mental health referral network, and depending on. So it's actually quite nice because, look, let's face it, sometimes people still don't want to talk to the coach, let alone a high performance director, about some of these things because they might think, oh, you think I'm weak, or so it's still an education. That I think a lot of people are now opening up and understanding that mental health is just part of life. And but I think now having the AW&E people in positions, it's really helping the athletes. And there's more transition happening. So, okay, you're going to retire, put together a 6-month plan and integrate, and have you got some course lined up, or what's happened? And I think sport is doing things way better than they did 15 years ago.
Some would say from the outside that maybe Matthew Mitchell was a bit tormented when he came out. And he didn't have to be. Tom Daley the same. But do you think Greg Louganis coming out has helped?
I do. And I mean, if you want to talk mental health, I mean, when Greg did come out, after hitting his head that he had HIV, and his boyfriend had died from AIDS, and his was the brutal era because this was the late 80s.
Yes.
And and that sounds awful, but people are still a little homophobic, and you're not meant to talk about it or open up about it the way we're all very comfortable now, sort of thing. So it was a tough era for him, and I do think it definitely helped Matt, because Matt was very clever. Mitchum, he came out and said it even before he went to the Olympics, so I thought that was very good. And of course, Tom Daley was very clever how he did it, and I just think we're all well, I like to think we are more acceptance now of it, and it's fascinating. Some of the greatest divers in the world are gay, and part of that is because of their incredible. It's sort of like their artisticness. They just look. They have a different flair to them. It's fantastic. So. But I do think Greg was a pioneer in a tough era, and and it's funny you mentioned Matt Mitchum. He's living in London, so we brought him in for the camp for a couple of days, and he just spoke to our athletes at lunch today and showed his gold medal. But he was very open too. He talked about some of his mental health problems and issues, and I think that's just good for this generation to hear. You might be an Olympic gold medalist, but the chances are some of the baggage you got's worse than other people, sort of thing. There's no easy ride to the top.
Do you know Greg Louganis well, Steve? What sort of bloke is he?
Yes, I do very well, actually. He was when I went to America, he sent me an email. I said, it's about time we got some brains here. So he was quite funny. So it was a classic. So, I actually went and visited him in Malibu. So he was doing all right, wasn't he? Malibu, very nice. Yes,
very nice.
And I had a chat with him, having a coffee, and I said, mate, how the hell do I get you back involved in USA diving? And he said, just ask. And that just blew me away, that here was this guy sitting there and no one from USA Diving was asking him.
Really?
And I think some of it was still that stigma from his past a bit, So I got him back involved as what we called athlete mentor.
Wow.
So this is like 2009, 2010, and brought him to camps. And when he did a group speech, he turned into his guest speaker,
Yes.
and he does a lot of corporations. And whilst that's good, I don't need him to be talking to the athletes like, when I hit my head on the board and how I got AIDS and all that. I want to know how the bloody hell you performed under pressure. So we changed that from his team speech to, you were going to go visit these designated programs where our best divers are, and you're going to sit on pool deck with the coach and the athlete and chit chat. And that was just powerful stuff. And I think he had a little bit of input on David Dyer from the USA winning that gold medal in London. So, yeah, and having Matt here was really important. I mean, there's just so much knowledge out there. Why we don't tap into it enough is a bit beyond me sometimes.
And just before I let you go, we've sort of gone in a number of different directions. It's great having you, Steve, on Dashing Games Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. When you made the final in those two events in 1984, how satisfying was it? And did you realise how big an achievement it was at the time?
Well, I'm not sure about how big the achievement was, because that, this was all for me, right? You got to do it for yourself, and I'd set that goal. It's probably just extremely satisfying and perhaps a bit of a relief when your sort of goal, target, aim comes to life. Like, don't think I didn't want to win a medal, but in some cases you've got to be realistic. No one was going to beat Greg Louganis. China were at their first Olympics, and they were sharing some of the medals with the Americans. And so, I can look back and say the top 5 or 6 I don't know if I've ever beaten, but or fifth, but sixth, seventh, and no, I was eighth, and so you kind of bit of luck here and there. You might have got a sixth instead of an eighth, but to me, it was all about the performance, and it's like everything. You've got to start somewhere, and once, particularly in that Olympics, everyone made the finals. The next step is, and then the AIS program started. Right now, how do we gear this professionally towards winning medals? And it does take time, and it did take time. But once the breakthrough came, we're still winning medals. So, it's probably like what the Kangaroos are going through at the moment. But you can see them taking important steps, and okay, they've only won one, but they were so close to a couple of upsets along the way, and so you can see the steps they're taking. That that Olympic gold medal may be around the corner in 4 years.
Are you North Melbourne Kangaroos man, Steve?
No, I'm actually the Carlton Blues, mate.
Are you?
Yes, yes. So I've got a few mates that used to play back in the day. Rod Curley Austin was actually the phys ed teacher at Melbourne High when I was training there and doing my high school. And Jeff Southby and I became good mates at the
Great.
'82 Commonwealth Games when we had the exhibition. Yeah, so I just got to know a few of the guys, and when you're friends with them, you tend to follow their progress and cheer for the team.
Have you had a night out with a few of them, like Mark Sellers, McClure, and Wayne Piggy Harms and those boys? If you have, you've obviously lived to tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, the liver's nearly shut down, but
Yes.
we're doing all right, thanks. But yes, and you know what, isn't it great? And Dan, you get together with other sports, and the stories and the tales and the stuff that comes up is fantastic. And we know it was a bit of a different era because it was not as professional and no government support and a whole lot of different things. But um, I think the great thing is, you just, if nothing else, apart from learn, you do get wise, and it's just all these little experiences you gradually have, and you put them together 20, 30, 40 years later, and yeah, you become wise, and you just hope you can pass it back into the sport to help some of these people and their pitfalls that they can hopefully miss out on. And but like Vossi's doing a great job with the Blues, and there's so much respect for him. The guys look up to him, and they all know what a great player he was. Again, you can see the camaraderie, the belief, and the cohesion, and what I was talking about before. It's no good if you've got a coach here that they're not gelling with.
Now,
And you can see it with Vossi. I think they're really gelling brilliantly.
now, Steve, Melissa Wu, as I said, we've had her on a bit earlier on Dashing Games Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. Five-time Olympian. What a career it's been. Is she a chance of carrying the flag at the opening ceremony? I know she carried the flag at the opening ceremony in Birmingham in the Commonwealth Games in 2022, but it'd be a great way to finish it, wouldn't it? If this is the last one.
Yeah, look, it'd be a fairy tale. And, look, there's quite a few going to the fifth Olympics, a couple in the basketball and I think hockey and everything else. But certainly for her in an individual sport and what she's done and achieved is quite phenomenal. So in my humble opinion, she's very deserving, and it would be a great reward for her. But as I say, there's so many other great candidates too that we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think put it this way, you'd think her name's in the list anyway.
And without putting too much pressure, I mean, Australia have won a medal at every Olympic Games, as you touched on earlier, since 2000. Are you confident that record will stay intact?
Always confident, Dan.
Yeah,
I am. Look, well, exactly. But, we keep talking to them, expectations is a horrible thing. And what we try to do is not smother them with, come on, you can get a medal. We continue to talk about trying the process and just go out and do your best and let it unfold. But what we do know is, day one, Annabelle Smith and Madison Keeney, they dive into women's 3-metre synchro, and they've been on the podium just about every event the last 6 months. So they could put us off to a flyer. They could, say, right, here's a statement, we're off and running, and that'd be fantastic. So I guess we'll know a bit more on day one. But look, elite sport, Olympic sport, any sport, it all depends on the day. We get all that. So the main thing is, I think our preparation's been superb, and having this camp here in Southend and then taking the Eurostar over, it's I'm looking forward to that. I think you can get a cocktail on it. I'm not sure, but
really?
it's yeah. So it's I feel confident in what I call the preparation, and I think any coach will tell you if you've got the right preparation, chances are things will unfold the way you want them to.
You got a cocktail of choice, Steve, if you're on the Eurostar and they say, Mr. Foley, what cocktail would you like?
Well, I'm a bit disappointed because I know they're not going to have it, but I like my Bundy and Coke.
Oh,
I got a feeling they won't have that on the Eurostar, so maybe we'll just have a glass of wine.
glass of wine will do. Now, just before I do let you go, Steve, the future of the Olympic Games. I mean, you've been to so many of them now, 12, as we've said, this being your 12th. You feeling confident about it?
Yeah, look, I am. There's so many. I have so many thoughts. Like everyone's worried about the cost and the this and the that, and maybe instead of a city hosting it, it's a country.
Yeah.
Because then we wouldn't have all this fiasco about Brisbane and a new stadium, and we can't afford it, or we can't do that. You go and do the opening and closing at the MCG, the greatest stadium in Australia.
I agree with that.
You've got a great aquatic centre in Sydney. Go and do swimming and dive. So that's just one thought I've had, and
Yes.
the other one is you've got other countries that have had the Olympics recent times, like Sydney, like London. Maybe you rotate
Yeah.
one per continent type thing where you can, and each Olympic committee throws in some money to support it and whatever else. But I think it just needs another rejig, but I just thought perhaps a country host it rather than a city.
And you're worried, you had a great record, you won gold medals at Commonwealth Games. You're worried about the future of the Commonwealth Games after the Melbourne fiasco or the fiasco in the regional cities?
Yeah, look, that is more of a concern, to be honest. Yes, where the Commonwealth Games is. I know they're working hard to try and find a place and use some of that money that Victoria got fined to offset the costs for someone putting the hand up. But no one's quite come forward yet. There's been a few whispers and rumours, but it's hanging by a thread. There's no question, because I think if no one does it, then it is pretty much the end of it.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping they might do what the rugby do and share it with Australia, New Zealand, or something like that, and
That'd be
that could
great.
be quite cost effective. Yeah. So it's just, to me, let's start thinking outside the box a little bit. If you really want to maintain the history of all these great sporting events, you're just going to have to do it a bit different.
Well, Steve, you're a legend in your sport, three-time Olympian, multiple Commonwealth Games as well, winning gold medals. And you, of course, made the final in 1984 in both the springboard and the platform. You've now become one of the most respected high-performance managers and coaches at Team Great Britain, USA, and also Australia. Good luck to the Australian team. Let's hope they go well. I reckon they will. They've got a great record in recent Olympic Games. And I thank you for joining us on Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans, who deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital. They do Zoom as well. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel. And their areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash out construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Steve, thanks for joining us and have a great time in Paris.
Good on you, Dan. Appreciate it. Lovely to talk to you.
You too. Thanks, mate.